Boundless Authenticity Podcast.
When you manifest, do you call in spirit? Do you imagine what you want? Do you use your right brain or your left brain? Well, I'm Laura Van Tyne, and I will be hosting a manifestation mastery course this coming January. And this isn't going to be your typical wishing and hoping and vision board kind of course. We're diving into strengthening our intuition, removing those pre-programmed belief structures, and working in the quantum field and more to help you achieve what you want and you deserve. Join us now by clicking on the link below.
Thanks for tuning in to the Boundless Authenticity Podcast. There is something timeless about humanity's fascination with the unexplained. Across cultures and centuries, people have told stories of strange encounters and hidden knowledge and forces that exist beyond what we can easily explain. Today's conversation explores why these stories persist and exactly what they might reveal about the human psyche rather than just the phenomena itself or themselves. My guest today is Robert Bitto, the creator of Mexico Unexplained. He's a long-running archive creator. He is dedicated to Mexican folklore, ancient mysteries, and unexplained phenomena. Robert's work focuses on preserving stories and examining their historical, cultural, and psychological significance, rather than the bullshit sensationalism that you find everywhere else. What's going on, Robert?
Thanks for having me on again. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, you know, the interesting thing is that our last conversation was one of the most listened to episodes last year.
Oh, wow. Cool. That's good to know. Let's do it again with this show.
Let's talk about the universal pull of mystery and what originally drew you to documenting unexplained stories and folklore.
I was bored. I was sick of my ordinary life. No, I'm kidding. That could be part of it. And that could be the answer to why people in general are drawn to this sort of thing. But in my case, I own an imports company where I go down to Latin American countries and I buy mostly handcrafted stuff. And I bring the items back to the United States. I've been doing this for 26 years, since 1999, going on 27 years. And my job, so to speak, takes me to some interesting places. And I found that there were a lot of different stories and legends, myths, whatever, connected to these places that weren't making it out of the region that they were from or out of Mexico into the English-speaking world. So this is why I started my show. And I've always been fascinated with this sort of stuff. And I know this is kind of cliched and people say this a lot, but people, especially of my generation, when they were kids or whatever, they watched In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. And that was like a big thing. Saturday afternoon at 4:30, everybody was home watching that. But so I've always been interested in this sort of thing. And my niche developed through my business because, as a Yelp review once said about me, they called me, I don't know if this is true, but it kind of fits, the Indiana Jones of Mexican arts and crafts, because I would go to the remote areas and, buy things. But going to these remote areas exposed me to all of these different things, from religious things that were, religious motivated, or religious related, like statues crying blood, the typical stuff like that. And then from that to flying saucer landing sites, then to creatures and, other legends and things like that. So I figured, what, someone needs to be documenting this stuff. And so that's where the podcast, the YouTube channel, and the books came from, really.
So based on all of your experiences, why do cultures across the world develop stories about unexplained forces or beings or events, even when there's no real direct connection?
Well, maybe they could be real. Okay. Or once again, like I said at the beginning, people could be bored too. They might want to make up stories because, looking into this paranormal or even these legends or whatever, it's something out of the ordinary. And most people in the world, I could speak for most people, I think, they lead very ordinary lives. So if your life intersects with a really cool legend, or if you've seen a ghost or a UFO or whatever, that takes you out of your ordinary life, your ordinary way of thinking. And I think people deep down don't want mediocre, ordinary lives. And so that legends, myths, sightings, paranormal activity, that gives us something to wonder about and something that takes us out of the ordinary.
You know, I would agree with you on that because I recently started another project called Mysteries of the Mountain State, Paranormal West Virginia. And that just got started based on all of the stories that my girlfriend tells me about her hometown and stuff. She lives in West Virginia, right? Right around where she lives, there's a lot of stuff like Mothman, and there's even like a diner that's dedicated to Bigfoot and things like that. And it's just, some of the stuff is so wild that I got inspired to do that project. There are so many stories, and like the gift shops and everything fascinate me. So I'm like, wow, I'm never going to leave this gift shop. There's such a fun atmosphere, especially around the Bigfoot places and stuff. You can tell that without that, the people in those areas would ultimately be missing on something. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, how do fear and curiosity and the average person's automatic penchant for meaning making interact together whenever there's like these stories of the unexplained?
Yeah, well, all of those things that you mentioned on that list, they all become activated when you're listening to stories or when you're experiencing this stuff. And I think that's universal. You know, you go to different cultures and every culture has monster stories or whatever, and everybody's going to be feeling similar feelings. You know, we're more similar than we're not, you know, contrary to what we're being told nowadays, you know. So there's a lot that we share in that respect regarding legends and mysteries and stuff. All those emotions come to the forefront pretty much with everybody.
So as you're walking around and collecting your stuff and you talk to people, do you ever meet the kind of people that their identities based on whatever spooky thing is going on?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, people who claim to have seen things or whatever, or people who run little attractions. You know, like I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but there's a museum in the southern part of the state of Guanajuato in Mexico called the Cámbaro. And the museum is full of dinosaur figurines that were supposedly unearthed. And some of them date back 2,000 years. And they show like humans with dinosaurs. And so a lot of the people in that town, that's their identity. The place where you know, they discovered that figurine of the man riding a triceratops, you know, and all that stuff. So yeah, you can go to some of these places and yeah, people's identities are really intertwined with what the local legends are or what's been found, or and the apparitions, you know, the religious shrines and things like that. Yeah.
In keeping with that theme as folklore, as a form of identity, how do you think the collective unconscious of these places comes into play? Like collective memory with, you know, there's a lot of strong oral tradition and whatnot in Mexico, especially. So what do you think about that?
Collective memory. Are we talking like Akashic records or, you know, something esoteric like that, or just like the folk memory passed down from person to person?
Just based on your personal experience with speaking with people, how do you see them reliving certain aspects in terms of like, I don't want to say like Jungian philosophy, but the collective unconscious?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question.
I know. I saved it just for you.
Thanks a lot, putting me on the spot. I'm usually pretty quick at answering these sort of things. I guess I really don't understand the question all that much because, I don't know if you can rephrase it again for me, but.
Okay, so let's say that there are aspects of our present and our future that are shaped by things that happened in the past.
Right.
And people have a way of recreating history. How do you see that playing out as you speak to people?
Well, they're reliving the legends every time they tell them, so, and then they pass them down to their children. And that creates certain feelings, that have been around for, I don't know, depending how long the legend's been around. So that's a transmission of memory, that can go back thousands of years in certain places, and a transmission of feelings too that go along with the legends. So I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Well, do you ever come across people who don't believe it, but it's their identity anyway? Like, that's a strange thing, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Well, I've heard people like say, I have to go outside of Mexico to answer that question. I lived in Brazil for a while, and I've gone down there on buying trips, and I have trafficked in some of the artifacts, ritual objects for candomblé and macumba, which are two Afro-Brazilian religions, almost like Santeria. And I have talked to ordinary Brazilians about that. And they have said to me, eu não acredito nisso, mas eu não vou mexer com isso. Meaning, I'll translate in English, I don't believe in it, but I wouldn't want to mess around with it. So I wouldn't want to mess with it. Okay. Mexer, meaning mess around. And so it's part of the Brazilian identity. And even if you're an atheist, a lot of people will say, oh, but I just won't mess around with it. And then when you probe them, when you ask them deeper questions, they're like, well, and then they'll shut down the conversation because they really don't want to talk about it. So I don't know, but it is part of their identity, even though they don't believe in it. Or they say they don't. They say they don't, but they don't want to mess with it. So what does that tell you? It tells you they
on some level they do believe in it, right?
Yeah. And those statues and everything, those were, when I could get my hands on those, I was trying to make a deal with the manufacturer, but for some reason in the United States, they were selling like crazy. I guess because there's very little access to that sort of stuff here for those two religions, candomblé and macumba. But if you go to Brazil, there are little shops that deal in these spiritual items. And you can go in there like a pharmacy and say, well, I have this wrong with me, this wrong with me. And then they'll bring out herbs or statues or candles or whatever for you. Or if you say, I want to put a curse on my cousin or something, then they'll, bring out a little statue or whatever and some incense or something. But most of Brazil, they don't practice it, but it's part of their national identity.
Fascinating. I got to get myself over to Brazil.
Oh, it's a wonderful place. I lived there when I was much, much younger. And then I've been back several times, on buying trips and stuff. So yeah, it's such a wonderful place.
I worked with a Brazilian artist once, and I could never tell if she was happy or angry when she was talking to me. I was like, oh, am I in trouble?
That's funny.
It's a very passionate language.
Yeah. Yeah.
Moving on to the reality of creating the stories that you do for Mexico Unexplained. I mean, you handle a lot of information, right? So,
Yes.
in your opinion, what do you think matters most? The literal accuracy of the stories or the emotional reality?
Well, I think the literal accuracy of the stories, the emotions come after that. Because if I tell a story accurately, then the emotions will follow, I think. And sometimes the emotions are intertwined with the story, of course. But yeah, I try to be as accurate as I can be. And I try to go to multiple sources, but sometimes that's extremely hard to do, especially if you're dealing with a legend that comes out of one little specific area. You know, there's nowhere else to go but the few people or whatever who are telling the stories in that town or whatever. But I try to be as accurate as possible. And then the emotions come after that.
So I know you deal with some pretty startling evidence and some outrageous topics and stuff. So how do you deal with skepticism and how do you balance that with being open when you're researching these topics?
Well, there's certain, because I realize that in life, there are certain things that you will never have answers to. You will never understand ever. Okay. And so I just say it's okay to have a sense of wonder and it's okay to be open-ended. And I'm a big skeptic, actually. You know, a lot of people think that I believe in everything that I talk about. Even I've had a relative come down when I lived in San Diego, came down from Bakersfield to do an intervention with me. I don't know if I told you this before, did I? I think I did.
You did, but tell it again.
Yeah, they came down to do an intervention with me because, I believe in aliens and all, you know, and I believe in this and that and the other thing. And this person hadn't even listened to one of my podcasts or hadn't even watched a YouTube channel. In every single one of those, I have a disclaimer at the beginning of the show. That person didn't even have to listen to 1 minute of my show to learn that I'm presenting things. I don't necessarily believe in any of this stuff. You know, I'm presenting it. I want to be as accurate as possible. And as far as, you know, do these things exist? Are they real or whatever? There's a part of me that says, who cares? I mean, the Bigfoot stories out of Mexico, there are 2 Mexican Bigfoots, for example, and there's never been a body. There's never been blood extracted from a dart or whatever, like some people have been wanting to do. But so then where does that leave me? Okay. I just say, so maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. Okay, move on to the next topic. You know, let's look at the next legend or whatever. We can put that on the shelf for later. And some people get so obsessed with their topics. Take any lifelong JFK investigator, you know, the assassination of Kennedy. You'll never find any sort of resolution there. So you can build your life on something like that. I choose not to. I choose to say, okay, well, I don't know if it's true or not. And let's just put it on the shelf for later. We can have a sense of wonder. And what's the next topic? What, you know, what's the next legend? What's the next creature or whatever? And I go from there. So.
Okay, so let me see if I can put you on the spot some more then.
Oh, okay.
Going along with your answer to that question, what do you think actually gets lost when the unexplained phenomena in question is dismissed without curiosity?
I think a lot gets lost because eventually everything will get lost, will get lost if it's dismissed. You know, if it's dismissed for long enough, then, you know, then we don't have it anymore. So if too many people see what I said is I put it on the shelf. If it's on the shelf, you can take it off the shelf again and look at it later. But if it's completely dismissed, then we'll lose it, I think, eventually. So I think it's good to keep it inside you, whatever, keep it around, even if you have no resolution as to if it's real or not.
That was a great answer, because now I can tell you to give the listeners a little bit of something to think about when it comes to the importance of authentic exploration and critical thinking.
Well, good. I'm glad I could help in some way.
And surely you have come close to mastering authentic exploration and critical thinking. You have to, in order to put together these stories and not lose your mind, you know?
Right. Yeah. You just have to, I mean, you have to look at things objectively, unless you have, well, that can be corrupted by personal experience. Okay. Like, I thought I had an encounter with one of these entities once when I was a little kid. So I'm kind of inclined to believe in it, but then there's a skeptical part of me that says, well, you were a kid, there were different factors involved and all of this stuff. So, you know, critical thinking, you have to keep that always at the forefront. And yeah, so.
Okay, I'm asking you too many hard questions, so I'll just ask you one more.
Okay. Yeah, these are very hard questions, but that's okay. That's all right. I'm up for it.
Well, you just mentioned and used the example of the JFK rabbit hole. Mm-hmm. That's never going to resolve itself. There's always going to be someone else coming out with more information to kind of perpetuate the mystery even more. Much of what you encounter regularly is kind of like that as well, because it's so old. And if nobody's found the answers to it by now, they're probably not going to, right?
Right.
Do you think that there's a particular psychological reason when stuff is never resolved, if that, you know, it's set up that way on purpose, or it just happened that way? Or do you think that, like what I just said is the case, there's people who perpetuate myths on purpose, and there's probably groups of people that know the answer, but they don't ever want to tell you?
Well, someone has to know the truth behind JFK. And I think part of the whole psyop is to get people to go down these rabbit holes. But in the case of a little legend from a Mexican town or whatever, doubtful that's a psyop. It's just kind of out there and you can't really prove it. And then you just move on. You know, was there a certain creature? There are some cryptids in my second book, if I may plug my book. It's called Mexican Monsters, the Cryptids and Legendary Creatures of Mexico. Well, you know what? Those aren't necessarily stories. I think some of those animals could be real animals. You know, there is the Mexican onza, for example. It could be a holdover from the ancient North American cheetah. And Mexico has enough open space to have a habitat for that. And also the gigantic owl. There are too many people seeing these creatures. So sometimes you can go down the rabbit hole and hit the bottom of the rabbit hole, I think. I mean, in the prime example that people use all the time is the panda or the mountain gorilla. These were mythical animals at one time too, you know. And I think the world is still too vast and too wondrous. We're in our little cities or whatever, and we don't realize just how vast it is out there. And there could be some creatures who are surviving in little pockets. But other than that, it's kind of, how do you prove or disprove an alien or the black-eyed children or whatever? You know, you have to capture one of those black-eyed kids and hold them hostage in your house or something. But, you know, it's really hard to pin down a lot of this stuff. And some of it could be psyops. The more I mean, honestly, I'll be really honest with you now. And I usually don't say what I believe or what I think really straightforwardly like this, but the more I look into the whole alien thing, the more I'm convinced that there's nothing there, that it's some sort of government alphabet agency type, you know, psyop. or it's something else, but there's not a whole lot there from what I've researched. There are a lot of stories that get repeated and tossed around and things, but there's not a whole lot of substance. And I'm wondering why this is being perpetuated, and the whole disclosure movement and all of that stuff. I don't think the government has anything. I think they're making a lot of this stuff up from what I've seen.
Yeah, and if I may share my opinion, I just talk to enough people to know that there's something that's going on, but what it is, I don't think we're ever going to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what are you going to do? Spend 10 hours of your day doing research and, then get all, I'm thinking of the Simpsons cartoon when Bart broke his leg and Lisa said to the mom, I'm concerned about my brother. Bart has become isolated and weird. Now, is that what people want to do and hold themselves up in their rooms and become isolated and weird and just get carried away with all of this stuff? And maybe that's part of the whole plan, to get people to act that way. I don't know.
You might be right. I see how some of the guests that I have on this show that are talking about that kind of stuff, they are so consumed by it. It becomes an obsession. They see something funky in the sky and they're like, now I got to go off on this tangent for the rest of my life. And I don't know. I'm not trying to judge anybody at all, but me personally, I just can't do that. I want to live a full expansive life. It's interesting to talk about the stuff sometimes, but
right. And if you want to live a full expansive life, you have to have that shelf that I talked about. You've got to put the item on the shelf and store it there and say it's okay to wonder, and I might take it off the shelf and look at it again, but you can't get too obsessed and too caught up in all of this stuff. And I've seen people, I was really good friends with someone who, he was on my show. I've done only 2 interviews. When I first started out 10 years ago this month, actually, in 2016, I had 2 people interview. I interviewed 2 people, and then I decided never to do interviews again, not to have an interview show, and just do, my own thing. But one of them was talking about sacred geometry and the pyramids on Mars, Cydonia, and all of that stuff. And the guy became so obsessed with this whole topic. He wrote a book. He did all of these mathematical computations and everything. And he had me proofread his book. And his sister contacted me and told me that he was committed. She committed him to a mental institution because he just got so whacked out. He started calling himself the chosen one, who was going to reveal all the secrets of Mars to the rest of the world because he figured out these mathematical formulas and stuff like that. And then his sister was contacting me regularly because she was like, Robert, you're like his only friend left, because he's going off the deep end and he's smoking pot all day and he's not working and all of this stuff. And he had like a breakdown, and she committed him to an institution. So
I feel sad for that guy. There's certain topics like the alien thing. I'm just investigating. I feel very called to investigate it because I want to know what is the purpose, because as the years roll on, right, the narratives just get weirder and weirder, right? I've had experiences where I can say something strange happened, but it's never affected me to the point where I just wanted to dedicate my life to it. And I'm kind of fascinated by that mindset. But at the same time, I jokingly say I'm not getting abducted by anything, or I'm not getting haunted by anything, because when I get up at like 3:30 in the morning to go to the bathroom to take a piss and I'm scratching my belly, my eyes are half closed, I'm opening the bathroom door and I see something spooky, I'm just like, not tonight, motherfucker. It ain't happening. Like it just ain't happening, and whatever it is just goes off, I've had a recent experience with like a Bible that was given to me that belonged to somebody, and it was an old one. And strange stuff started happening around my house, and I just dealt with it very calmly and gave the Bible back. And then the stuff stopped happening, and I was like, okay, yeah, well, I know that weird shit happens, but I didn't go off on a tangent, you know? So I just can't wrap my head around that mindset. As for like the secret space program and the MK Ultra things, now because I'm a hypnotherapist and because I have had clients that have discovered so many things that happened to them throughout their lives, that they were trafficked or they were potentially in programs and things like that, I understand that that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah, traffic is real. I mean, there's proof of that. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. And there's so much overwhelming evidence of people who have been not even necessarily taken to McGill University and had stuff done on them, but they've been mind controlled. And so I understand that part. And I have a tremendous amount of curiosity and compassion combined for people like that. But still, it doesn't have to become my reality, you know?
Right. Yeah. And that's healthy. I mean, because you want to be in the world around you, you know? But you can get sucked in like that Mars guy and then, you know, then have your sister commit you. that was so sad when she contacted me. I'm like, oh no, you know, it's too bad that he cracked. But that's what happens when you obsess about stuff. And I've tried to keep the Mexico Unexplained thing very healthy. It's a side gig for me. You know, like I said, since 1999, I've had this imports business. That's my life, you know, for the most part. And Mexico Unexplained, it's a nice hobby. And I really enjoy it. So, and I'll keep it that way. It's not going to take over my life. I'm not going to, you know, just suddenly go deep into the whole UFO phenomenon in Mexico or whatever. But yeah, I just find it fascinating. And yeah, and I keep it for me where it should be in my life. And so, like I said, some people, including that relative, think that I'm like the Mars guy, and I'm not. I'm not even close. You know, it's just something that I find interesting, and I devote some time to it. So it's fun.
You know, in the past, I've kind of had similar things happen as well. So I understand where people are like, oh, you're just listening to conspiracy theorists or whatever. I'm like, okay, yeah, but why did CNN just tell you what I've been trying to tell you for years, though? And they can't answer that question, right? I read books. Do you know what those are? You know, like you.
And you have to also have some sort of discernment too, you know, and you're reading books. And you probably have a good memory too. And so you're drawing on your memories and all of the stuff you have in your head and you're applying it to different things. And a lot of people don't do that. So I know the person who came down from Bakersfield to San Diego, he is not one of those reflective persons, and he doesn't have a good memory, and he doesn't study or have any curiosity about the world. And he just thought I was going off the deep end. And I'm like, what are you even doing here? You know? So, yeah.
I think maybe that's what is evident in some of the mysteries that you come across, and also evident in our current reality where there's certain things happening and we're like, okay, yeah, but such and such, Carol Quigley or what's his face, Aldous Huxley, all these people, yeah, okay, they wrote those books. I could call some more names. Dr. Juiced Merleau in his Rape of the Mind and all these other things about mind control. You can read those books and be like, okay, yeah, so he's referenced things in history that document that this stuff happens, right? And that it is probably happening again if you look around in reality, right? But it's like, how often do you watch the news and you see something and you're like, yeah, that's probably really happening? Not very often anymore, right? Unless it's like local news. Some of it just seems so, please believe me, it's breaking news, like that kind of wimpy, wimpy attitude. I think that's what's missing from real life these days. People who are like, yeah, okay, the TV or the internet told me this. But do I actually see that happening? I can't find any evidence for that. Instead, people just jump right on it and they're like, yeah, Daily Mail said this thing happened, so it must be true.
Yeah, like the big event that happened almost 6 years ago now. I mean, the TV told me so. Oh, really? Well, where are the bodies that are in the streets of these big cities? Where are the homeless people, dropping like flies or whatever? Oh, no evidence? Oh, there's the evidence. Dancing doctors who had enough time to choreograph, these elaborate dance scenes, supposedly during, this big event.
Well, people are laying in bed dying, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's a real compassionate way to deal with it. My favorite is when I see somebody that didn't believe me when I said that there's nothing going on. And I'm like, hey, how's your grandmother doing? And they get, what do you mean? Like, well, you were worried that she was going to die from the cold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I wish I had a nickel for every time someone said, Darwin Award or whatever for me, And I was like, I'm just trying to warn you guys, Even when I was a little kid, people, and this is no brag at all, people said to me, you should use your smarts for good in the world and make the world a better place. Well, no one wanted to have any of it. I was analyzing things. I was showing proof, whatever. I was using my smarts to benefit the world, but no one was having it. So from now on, I'm not going to, you're on your own,
That's one of the most interesting things about being a human. Mediocrity is praised, but intelligence is frowned upon.
Oh, yeah.
And it's crazy. Like, even back to what happened a few years ago, there's people that are currently discovering the old episodes. And I was being real cheeky when I was asking the question. So is there a virus or is there not a virus? I knew there wasn't no damn virus, but I was asking my guests that. And so people are commenting and they're like, I don't like the host. He's arrogant and he rambles too much. And I'm like, okay, well, if you say so, it must be true. I just really don't care. And these are the people that perpetuate the majority of the dysfunction in the world. So let's say, for instance, in one of your most recent episodes, you're talking about the ghosts of Ciudad Juarez or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be people that are going to be like that. Like, they're going to instantly hate on you because you just told a story, and you said whatever you said, and they're going to interpret that through their own weird identity filters. Tell me about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, because people don't want to be seen as unusual or whatever, or away from the norm. And so they'll point to someone like me. And it's interesting that you mentioned the ghosts of Ciudad Juarez, because a guy from my history class in 11th grade, okay, who used to sit across the aisle from me, over 40 years ago. Okay, now I'm dating myself, right? But this guy, he was on Facebook and he said, ghosts. And this was like one of my first ghost episodes. And that was 10 years ago. That was maybe like March of 2016. Ghosts? You're talking about, you believe in ghosts? And I'm like, I was going to use the D word, dumb. I didn't say I believed in them. I'm just telling the damn story. God, relax. But that gave him some sort of power or feeling of internal power. At least I'm not like that whack job over there, meaning me. But, like I said, I wasn't obsessing about it or anything. I'm just presenting it. But it makes people want to feel normal, I guess. And during the whole, fake thing that happened 6 years ago, what I found, what a lot of people, what they were doing were, they were saying, hey, I'm not stupid, but I'm not smart as a virologist. So I'm just going to let the smart people, figure this all out. And in order for me not to appear dumb, I'm going to just say that I go along with the smart people. All right. But what I said in a Facebook post in March of 2020, I said, you're the smart person. You are the smart person. You have everything inside you to figure this out yourself. Don't defer to smart people and say, oh, well, because that person's wearing a white lab coat, then I have to say what they're saying, because if I don't, then I'll be perceived as dumb. And I know I'm smart, but I'm not as smart as that expert. So I'll just say what the expert says. And then you had this like bell curve. You had people who, were not very well educated or whatever, were saying things like, I've been fooled so much by the government. I've been screwed over so many times. This is another one. And then the middle majority would look at that person and say, oh, well, look at where they're living and look at their education level and, even look at their race or some other qualities about them and go, oh, well, they're just a rube and they're just, a redneck or whatever. And then you had the other part of the bell curve who were like really thinking individuals who were intense about thinking about it and could see what a fraud it was. But you had the whole other middle of the bell curve ruining it for everybody because they didn't want to be perceived as not normal. And so, to tie it back in with Mexico Unexplained, I see a lot of people who don't want to be, I even heard other relatives tell me that some cousins don't want to associate with me because of what I do with this side gig, because it's too weird. And if they associate with me, then that weirdness somehow rubs off on them or something. And it's like, I don't know. My glow of weirdness will shine on them. And, I don't know. But
that's just God saving you from dysfunction, Robert.
Yeah,
I mean, like,
I agree.
It's just that there's a certain characteristic that lives within people like you, myself, and others, where we just want to live our lives, right? But in order for us to live our lives, we have to put ourselves in a position of vulnerability 24/7 and just enjoy the things that we want to enjoy. And think about what other people are saying, because as long as you're following what somebody else is saying, you're not following what you want to do, even if you're wrong, right? Yeah. And we know that, and we're fine with being wrong. And that's what makes you smarter, because you just don't know what you don't know. And, maybe you don't care, or, you're willing to find out. You're willing to mess up or have an unpopular opinion or whatever the case is. And everybody else is just so scared to go there. And there's all this false independence that gets pushed on us. You got to stay informed, or you're not a smart person, or you're not a good person. It's wild. It's wild. We were saying before we started the good part of this interview about you asked me if I really feel like the world isn't going in a good direction right now, and I think right now it is incredibly evident that there's so much division, and that's not going to lead to anything good. Maybe it's just a phase, is what I think.
Yeah, it could be. But what kind of division are you seeing that is out of the norm of history?
Because now the internet has made it so that everyone can have their opinion, and there's a big psychological operation that we're all born subjected to, where you're entitled to your opinion, right? But what exactly is an opinion is the question that most people don't ask themselves. An opinion is just the best conclusion that you have come to with the information that you have, which suggests you don't have all the information. So stop running your mouth. The only thing you're entitled to is to live and to die, and whatever happens in that space is totally up to you. So that's where things are too far gone. Everybody's got a shit square in their pocket, and they can just type up any old thing that they think of in a comment section anywhere.
I long for the days of the late 90s when only smart people had computers. I mean, I don't know if how long you've been online or whatever, but in the late 90s, it was a whole different thing. Fine, the technology was junk, right? But the people online were intelligent and they were respectful. That's what's changed a lot. There was a lot of respect back then that's completely gone now.
Yeah, my first operating system was Windows 97.
Oh, okay. So you go way back too.
Yeah.
My email address I've had since 1996. Yeah, so I've been online. The first time I logged onto the internet was 1991 when I was in college.
Wow. And
I actually broke a law too. I don't know if I should say that online here, but I'll tell you. I have one of my degrees is I have a master's in Latin American studies, and that's like really liberal leftist, I was in classes with hardcore Marxists and stuff like that, communists, all these idealists, talking about how communism never really has worked, but we're going to make it work. We're going to be the ones that are going to do it successfully or whatever. But there was at the time the Trading with the Enemy Act, where you could not trade with Cuba, for the United States. That's lifted a little bit now. There have been lifts in the trade restrictions and the, ability to travel to the island or whatever. But the Trading with the Enemy Act included electronic communications with the island. And my Cuban Revolution, that was the class's name, the Cuban Revolution, a master's level class. He gave us the challenge to contact Cuba because there were all of these firewalls, as we call them now. They weren't called that back then. There were all of these firewalls that were up where you could not contact Cuban universities. And he gave us the challenge to do that. And he said, well, you might get a call from the CIA or whatever because it violates the Trading with the Enemy Act. So I was the only one in that class. I was the very first one to actually communicate with the university in Havana. And how I did that is I bounced the communications off of a node in Canada. I mean, it's an easy trick now. You've heard of that before, I'm sure, but nobody thought about doing that. And so I did that, and I contacted, and nothing happened to me. No CIA came, and nobody, I wasn't arrested or anything like that. It wasn't a big deal. And then that got lifted. Like within 5 years, we could communicate with them. But yeah, I don't know why I brought that up. Oh, because we were talking about the early days of the computer and the internet stuff. Yeah, so
yeah, fun story. I almost didn't get let out of Cuba one time in 2002. What? I went there, and they were like, "You're lying. This is a fake passport. You're a Cuban." And I'm like, "Really? What? I don't speak a lick of Spanish
Really?
yet.
What?
I'm Cuban."
How funny!
Do you not hear the Barbados accent?
That's funny. Wow.
Yeah, it was just wild. But I remember, God bless Eduardo, the gigolo that we met in Cuba. He was like living and working in the hotel that we stayed at, because I went there for a field trip for my Spanish class.
What? Really?
And there's like this freaking gigolo, and he was like the entertainment at night too. So he'd just pick up these women, take them to his room. And I remember one time we were asking him questions about the history of Cuba, and he was like, "Hey, listen, the whole thing's about the drugs, okay?" Okay, bye, kids.
Wow.
He's like, everything's about drugs. Very simplistic.
Well, that's great that you had that opportunity to go there.
Yeah, it was wild. It was actually very sad. We were exposed to poverty like we'd never seen before. On
Really?
on the streets of Havana and stuff like that, and the other more country areas. Wow. Some very
But
humbling stuff.
the people in my Latin American studies classes would tell you how much of a success the revolution was. Like as far as medical, improvements, doctors and things like that. But I don't know. I mean, I was never there. I've never been to Cuba even now, so I have no idea.
Seeing it firsthand, you can see that there's a split. There's a lot of poverty, and then there's some that, they're doing pretty okay. In terms of language acquisition, it's phenomenal. You meet people on the street that are dirty and dusty, but they speak 7 different languages, or you meet
really?
people that are very well spoken, speak English better than you and I do. And they also speak like another 12 languages. They're very well educated.
Really?
When it comes to medicine, their capacity for understanding that kind of stuff and their protocols appear to be really good. We take in a lot of Cuban doctors here that come and solve issues that doctors here that have been all over to the UK and stuff like that to study medicine have no answers for. So,
really?
Yeah.
So maybe there is truth to that then.
There is some truth to it, yeah. But according to Eduardo, it's all about the drugs. So, yeah, I mean, what else can we talk about? Tell me about,
what do you think?
Tell me about some of the latest stories that you published, because I'm not sure if I'm getting the name right, so I'm not even going to say that name, but it's the story of the obsidian. When I listened to that, I was like, I need to go on Expedia and find out how much flights to Mexico cost, because I'm missing out on some of this stuff.
Yeah, well, obsidian, yeah, it's beautiful. It's, I guess, Ixtli is the word that you were maybe struggling with. That's the Aztec, the Nahuatl word for obsidian, which is volcanic glass. And some people think that that was a black screen before I touched it, but the black screens that we carry around in our pockets, that's the evolution of what the obsidian mirror used to be in the Aztec world or the ancient Mexican world, something that you look into. They used to do what they call scrying, where they look into the dark obsidian square or the circle and, predict the future, look into the future, whatever, or it can open up a portal for you to go into another dimension. And it's kind of funny that we all are now looking at these black screens, just like how they used to do in ancient Mexico. And one of the obsidian mirrors that belonged to Emperor Montezuma, that was in his palace and used by his priests and stuff and by him himself, it made its way to England and was used by the magician, alchemist, whatever, John Dee, who was at the court of Queen Elizabeth I. And he supposedly used that Aztec mirror to, divine the future of the British Empire. Your little piece of the world there could have been influenced by the little black mirror that John Dee had acquired, that used to be part of the Aztec treasure. So yeah, there we are. So yeah, that's a very interesting substance. And it can be green, different colors. And it's easily trackable or traceable to a specific volcano. Each obsidian, each chunk of obsidian has a signature that can be traced to a certain volcano or chain of volcanoes. So they know where these pieces of obsidian have come from. And do I have some?
This was it right here. When I saw these, I was like, okay.
I have some right here on my shelf. I don't know if I can show here, but right there, right next to that stop sign, where am I? The other way. Right here, here's one of them. Yeah. So I have some of those here. You can buy those. Those are usually for sale at any pyramid site. You'll have some guy saying, "Hey, it's authentic. You know, this is Tlaloc, the rain god, and this was carved, 1,200 years ago." And you can buy these replicas. They're like $5 a piece or something, because obsidian is very abundant. Because in central Mexico, it's the volcanic zone, and these civilizations grew up around these volcanoes, around these, it's the central Mexico is the perfect place to have a civilization, actually, because you have the rich volcanic soils, you have the temperate weather, even rainfall. It's like the perfect place. It's always 72 degrees. It's it's the perfect climate. So
yeah, I have a cousin that swears by it. He's like, I'm never leaving Mexico. Never. So yeah, I went through some of these and I just thought to myself, when I saw those statues, I was like, you know what? I got to go to Mexico. I'm missing out on a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I traffic in that sort of stuff. That's how I make my living. I buy the arts and crafts like that. That's why I have some on my shelf over there. That's like my personal stuff. I have in my personal collection, I have a Tlaloc god, the rain god. I have like all of these different idols. And then I have a dagger that's made out of obsidian too.
Yeah. Yeah, I listened to this one too. Before we get into that, it says donations, support the show. Give the man your money. Give it to him. Get the books. Mexico Unexplained. I'm going to have to get a couple of these books, honestly.
You know what? My next book is coming out. Well, it came out on December 11th, and it's called Mexico's Hidden History. It's not here on the website yet because I haven't received my author's copies, and you can order signed copies of the book from my website. And so when I get sometime this week, I'm getting my author's copies. And so, yeah, they can be ordered off of this website.
Gotta get this coloring book. This looks pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting indeed. And I happen to know a little kid that would like that. By little kid, I mean me.
Oh, yeah.
So tell me about this story before we wrap things up. This is the 1976 disappearance and reappearance of this guy,
Rafael Pacheco Perez.
Yeah.
Well, he took off. He was a student pilot, and he took off from an airport, and in Mexico City airport, and then wound up by the coast, and he could not have arrived there just by naturally flying. He blinked out. He passed out or whatever, supposedly. He lost consciousness and then woke up, outside. You can see the map down there, right outside of Acapulco. And there was no way that he could have flown there in the time that it took, the time that he reappeared. So some people believe that supposedly there was an alien encounter. Okay. But some people believe he went through some sort of vortex. But yeah, because people heard a weird voice, through, I guess, the air traffic controllers heard a weird voice. And some people said that was an alien that had taken over his body or whatever. So there's another story about a couple from Argentina that just appeared in Mexico. There three really famous stories that are similar to this, where people just, I see your comment, people just like teleported. Okay. In colonial Mexico, there was a guy also by the last name Perez who supposedly fell asleep in Manila in the Spanish Philippines and woke up in Mexico City. And like I said, there was another story of a couple in Argentina who were driving along a road in Argentina and it got all foggy and weird. And then they appeared outside of Mexico City on a road with their car and everything. I mean, the car transported supposedly. So I don't know. How do we explain things like this?
Yeah, I've been trying to keep up with some of your stuff whenever I remember, just in the spirit of honesty. And mainly because I have another show as well. People are like, how many shows does this guy have? It's called Shadows of Curiosity. And it's a lot of stuff that people submit to me. A lot of it's about the UFO stuff where people go missing or they see strange things, right? And some of this stuff is right along that, in that same vein. And I like it. It just makes me tingly. It's mysterious.
Yeah. I mean, in the case of this plane, for example, or even the car from Argentina, how do you explain that? Those happened. There's photographic proof. There are, and the story that you just pulled up, there are witnesses, investigations. It was impossible for that plane to be at that place at that time. So what do we do with that? Okay. Well, back to what we were talking about before. You can be so obsessive about it that you can keep investigating it until your sister puts you into an asylum. Or you can say, well, there's only so far we can go with this. And the rest, we'll just leave it to wonder. That's it.
I'm really just confused as to how you don't have more notoriety or don't get more publicity with this kind of stuff.
The man's keeping me down. No, I don't know. I mean, people constantly say that to me, but then I get people saying, well, your work is crap. That's why, So, okay. All right.
Okay. If you say it is, okay.
No, but then some people say, and I don't want to go this far, but some people say because what you're saying is, it's a threat to the establishment, whatever. I'm just some little guy. I'm just uncovering stuff. That's not fake humility. That is real because I don't have a big reach. I'm just doing this. But then some people, I have a lot of Mexican Americans tell me it's because there's still a lot of discrimination against Mexican Americans and Mexican people on platforms like YouTube, just based on ethnicity. So I don't know.
It could be outright suppression. It really could be because the nature of some of these stories, the topics and the evidence is so compelling and incriminating. And it's just stuff that probably they, whoever they just want to sweep it under the rug, and talk about Pokemon.
Well, my most popular show right now is the disappearance of the supermodel, Gabriella. And we might have talked about that on the last show, I think. Yeah. So that is my most popular show. And I still I get probably like 500 views a day on that still, even though that was years ago when I did that. And that intersects with a lot of like the Illuminati, the wealthy in Mexico, like the wealthiest of the wealthy, and about how this supermodel stumbled out of a hotel. And then there was this big effort to scrub the internet of all this information about her. And I kept on finding stuff, and people have sent me stuff too that you can't find anywhere, like a magazine cover that had her face on it. So she was a model. She was really who she said who people thought she was. But somehow that show is still up. I don't know why. You would think that show would be taken down or shadow banned or whatever, but I keep on getting a lot of views for it.
It's interesting. You never really know what's going to work, right?
And maybe it's popular because I'm off base or I'm leading people astray. I don't know, without even knowing it. I could be serving the elite without even knowing it by, putting forth a story that's, incomplete or something. I don't know.
Who knows? Who knows? I did enjoy that story though. That was, people act like things like that don't happen, And I think that that's probably the one thing that stops it from blowing all the way up, because a lot of people still call John Walsh crazy, Remember Unexplained, Unsolved Mysteries guy? Like, oh, he's a fuddy-duddy. He's the one that killed his children, Like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, all that crazy stuff. So yeah, it's okay when William Shatner does it, so maybe you should call him.
He's like, what, 94 years old now or something?
Yeah, he's adjusting his CPAP somewhere in the world. You seen that commercial? It's like,
yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff.
Well, I just appreciate you having me on again, and I appreciate what you do by, showcasing the bizarre, the weird, the interesting, and the thoughtful. And so I hope to talk to you again sometime if I'm still doing this. I've been doing this for 10 years now, and I think there is going to be a point where I'm going to have to back away because of other life concerns, but we'll see. I'll keep going. But yeah, if anybody wants to contact me or find out more about what I do, they can go to MexicoUnexplained.com and start there. And there are links and, things to point you in different directions. And everything that I have there's no paywall. You can read all of the stuff I've written. And I have references at the end of every show script. So if you want to go down the rabbit hole yourself, you can take a look at those references and then go from there and keep exploring if you want.
Thanks for tuning in to the Boundless Authenticity podcast. I've got to ask you, go ahead and please give this a like on whichever platform you're listening to so that we can grow this community a little bit more. And it wouldn't hurt you to subscribe and share either. But I'm going to say one more thing just to recap. Head over to MexicoUnexplained.com, read the articles, listen to the audios. You're already listening to stuff anyway. Just be honest with yourself. So you could as well listen to something that's really interesting. Robert, thank you for your work. Thank you for your creativity and your contribution and exploration into topics that are undefined and unknown. The world needs that. I encourage you, please don't give up. Life does happen sometimes. You need a break. That's okay. But come back to us with more crazy shit, because that's pretty much a lot better than what's on the news. So this has been another episode of Boundless Authenticity. Everybody enjoyed the first episode with Robert. The views and the likes speak for themselves. So I would encourage you to follow suit with this one and tell a friend who will tell a friend.
You're listening to the Boundless Authenticity podcast, where we discuss everything related to the evolution of human consciousness.
At the very least, people need to understand that the United States builds bunkers, which are basically cities underground, every 3 months.
Basically, when you dream, you tap into your subconscious. It is your nocturnal intuition, your creativity and imagination unchained from conscious reason, ego and logic.
They're biologically alive, but they have no
soul. They have AI consciousness. They can alter your conscious of the brain if they get the brain.
We live in a multidimensional reality. Whether it comes through esoteric information in the spiritual realms, or the UFO people, experiencers, or mainstream through quantum physics and through mainstream science now realizing that parallel dimensions probably exist.
We're all spiritual beings. We're all having these human experiences. We've heard that phrase over and over and over. But what does that really mean?
You know, all the big questions of life, we have these answers inside of our souls.
We're ultimately studying the nature of what it is to be human, good and evil, our psychology, how we think, and our health. That's why I love Bruce Lee's great quote, all knowledge is ultimately self-knowledge.
The Boundless Authenticity Podcast.